We Tonight, we are focused on the Citizen Initiative Petition and voting from a faith and civic perspective. I hope people walk away from this meeting informed, energized, and ready to engage on the issues discussed here. Now, I will turn the floor over to Holly to introduce our first speaker.
Thank you, Chris. And good evening, everybody. It is my pleasure to introduce my friend and my rabbi, Andrea Goldstein of Congregation Shaare Emeth. In the years that I have known her, I have watched Rabbi Goldstein take a particular focus in her work on tzedek, on social justice, and she is going to begin our program this evening by grounding our work in Jewish values. Andrea?
Hi, everybody. I just want to begin by saying it's pretty amazing how many people that we have joining us in the Zoom room tonight, which to me is a sign that people care about the future of our democracy and are willing to put their hands and heads and hearts together to work to make sure that we are able to preserve it. So I'm as Holly said, I'm gonna try to ground us a little bit in the Jewish faith tradition on why the issue of fair voting, equity in voting should be so important to the Jewish community. And I'll just begin by stating the obvious, which is that Judaism, really predates Western democracy, right? So it is hard to find Torah texts or even texts from the Talmud that are telling us about our rights to vote. But what we do see in Jewish texts is an evolution toward a system of government, democratic government, in which the people's voices are heard and affirmed. And so I'm going to take us through a very quick journey, very quick, I promise, of some text. And I'm going to try to do this by sharing my screen. So let's see if this will work. Okay. Yes, you can see my screen? Yes. Okay, great. All right. So I'm just going to begin here in the Torah, in Deuteronomy, where Moses, is talking to the people and says, look, when you get into this land that God is giving to you and you have it and you've settled it, and I know you're going to say, I will set a king over me like all the nations around me, right? He's saying to the Israelites, we know you're going to want a king because everybody else has a king. And then he says, be sure to place over yourself the king that God will elect for you. All right. So, okay. So there's more parameters than that, but there's this notion that God somehow appoints the king. And then what we see in the Hebrew Bible is how that even evolves, right? So in 1 Samuel, right, God is speaking to the prophet Samuel and says, tomorrow around this time, I will send you a man from the land of Benjamin, and you shall anoint him to be prince over my people Israel. He's going to save the people from the Philistines. God says, I have looked upon my people, their cry has come to me. And when Samuel the prophet sees Saul, God spoke to him and said, behold the man whom I said to you, this same shall have authority over my people. So it sort of came to pass, right? God chooses Saul to be the king. Okay, but then we get David, right? Who God also appoints. But in 2 Samuel, it says all the elders of Israel came to David before God and anointed David as the king of Israel. So it's no longer just God's appointed prophet. It's all the elders. It's like the leaders of the people have to come and say yes to what God has said. And then finally, in 1 Kings, Solomon is going to follow his father David, right? So this is lineage, of course, it's not voting, but the priest blows the temple, anoints Solomon, they blow the shofar, and all the people said, long live King Solomon, which our rabbinic sages say the people had to give their blessing. The people had to say yes. And what we end up seeing, so this is all in the Bible, as you can see, but what we end up seeing is a little bit further on into the 2nd century in the Talmud, something even more amazing happens. Okay, so this week, in our Torah portion this week, we're still talking about the building of the tabernacle, and God tells Moses that Bezalel, this artisan, is going to be the one that puts the whole shebang together because he's very gifted, Bezalel. But in the Talmud, so the rabbis are talking about this part of the Torah. The rabbis say, with regard to Bezalel's appointment, Rabbi Yitzhak said, one may only appoint a leader over a community if they consult with the community and the community agrees to the appointment. As it is stated, Moses said unto the children of Israel, see, the Lord called by name Bezalel, son of Uri, son of Hur, in the tribe of Judah. And then Rabbi Yitzhak goes on to say, here's what actually happened. God says to Moses, Moses, is Bezalel a suitable appointment in your eyes? And Moses says to God, Master of the universe, if he's a suitable appointment in your eyes, all the more so in my eyes. And the Holy One says to Moses, nevertheless, go and tell Israel and ask their opinion. And Moses went and said to the people of Israel, is Bezalel suitable in your eyes? And they said, if he's suitable in the eyes of the Holy One and in your eyes, Moses, all the more so is he suitable in our eyes. But this is a very gutsy text because what it says is that God, even God, can't really appoint one of the leaders over the people unless the people consent to it, unless the people agree, which is the beginning of the Jewish tradition's understanding of the importance of our Jewish involvement in the legislature, in the laws and the leadership of how we live day to day. And from this point forward, it becomes the sages' mandate of the people that we be involved in decisions that affect us in our own governance. And we have to make sure that our voices are able to be heard. We have to work in all the ways that we're able to make sure of that. Okay. And also this beautiful notion, right? This Jewish notion that government is actually a partnership, a holy partnership between the people and the Holy One, however we understand that to be, right? That we're guided by something greater than just ourselves. Okay, and then the last thing I was doing a little research in particular about the issue that we're talking about tonight. And I found this very interesting notion, which comes from the Shulchan Aruch, which is a 16th century text, where it says the residents of a town can force one another to put up a wall with gates and a bolt for the town and build a synagogue and buy the book of Torah, prophets, and writings so that anyone from the community may read from them. Right, so in the Shulchan Aruch, they're talking about how we live with one another. And it turns out, according to the Shulchan Aruch, like the residents can come together and decide what is important that they pay for together. Security and safety, the synagogue, and basically our sacred texts, right? But then Moses Isserles comes along, he's a commentator on the Shulchan Aruch, and says the following, and the same is true for all the needs of the town, meaning the residents can come together and decide that people have to pay for the needs in the town. The residents of the town can force one another to provide hospitality for guests, distribute charity to them, and contribute to the charity container, the tzedakah box. And with a matter that the community is not able to be in agreement about, all the heads of households that pay taxes should convene and accept upon themselves that each one proclaims their opinion for the sake of heaven, and then go according to the majority. And if the minority refuses to go along, the majority can force them to comply. The idea here is that the people should be able to put forth the laws, the ideas, the values that they believe make their lives better. And in Missouri, we have limited, like we're getting limited, more limited in the ways that we have for the people to make those voices, make our voices heard. And but what our tradition says is that it's incredibly important. It's actually incumbent upon us to not give up, but to speak out in all the ways that we are able. And that if the way that we are able to express ourselves is threatened, we have to work to protect that right that the people have to speak about how they believe based on their values, they want to live their lives. So I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to conclude with just one final thought. Okay. So here we go. This is my final thought. In Pirkei Avot, which is also part of the Talmud, you may be aware of this text, where in Pirkei Avot it says, "Pray for the welfare of the government, for without fear of the government, human beings would devour one another." Make of that what you will. I want to pray for our government all the time because I think our government needs our prayers, but I want to conclude with a different kind of blessing. I want to say in this climate where our democracy, I believe, is being threatened on a variety of fronts, we also have to pray for ourselves, that we have the strength and the will, the collective will to do what we can to protect the way that our democracy can continue to flourish for ourselves and for our future. So I'm going to end with this blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lirdof tzedek. Blessed are you, eternal our God, connector of all within the universe. You help us to recognize a sense of holiness through the commandments, and you command us to pursue justice. Together we say amen, and may it be so. Thank you.
Our next speaker tonight is Richard von Glahn of Missouri Jobs with Justice. Richard is a veteran of numerous community organizing campaigns as the organizing director of CWA, the Communication Workers of America, and as the policy director of Jobs with Justice. He's a veteran also of 10 initiative petition campaigns in Missouri, including Medicaid expansion, the Clean Amendment, minimum wage, and the fight to stop right to work. He serves on a number of national boards and commissions, including the widely respected BISC, or Ballot Initiative Strategy Center. He's an expert on the mechanics of the initiative process, the organizing necessary to collect hundreds of thousands of signatures, and the messaging necessary to win those campaigns. And he has the scars to prove it. Other than his support for the New York Yankees, he is absolutely the right person to help us understand this assault on democracy. My friend, Richard von Glahn.
Thank you, Ben. I appreciate it, and I appreciate that you reference my winning tendencies and support of the New York Yankees in all introductions. And thank you to Rabbi Goldstein for a wonderful opening and reflection. And maybe I'll ad lib a little bit as we go along, as I was moved by some of those words. But now I am going to try to share a screen. Let's see if this is working. That looks like that's working. So let's get into it. What is Missouri's initiative petition process? It's 115 years old. Over 115 years ago, Missourians saw fit to enshrine the right to direct democracy into our state constitution. As Rabbi Goldstein was speaking, it actually occurred to me that we enshrined our right to direct democracy before women had the right to vote in our state and in our country. And while Jim Crow segregation laws denied the right to vote to many of our Black neighbors. But we enshrined direct democracy into our state constitution. The initiative petition process, as a general overview, allows citizens to place laws or amendments on the ballot via a process of petition gathering signatures on pieces of paper saying we want an opportunity to vote on this law or this amendment and change the direction of our state. You usually have to gather hundreds of thousands of signatures. There's various geographic requirements of it, but it is a process of direct democracy. If you've ever had someone, or if you've ever had me approach you in a grocery store or outside of Temple or any other place, that's probably what this was about. It was about citizens taking matters into their own hands and deciding we wanted to make a change in our state. Embedding this right into our Constitution was meant to provide citizens a check on our legislature, to make sure that our voices would be heard and affirmed, even if politicians weren't hearing us. It has been part of our state, part of our culture, and part of our democracy for as long as any of us have been alive. This history, frankly, makes it a trusted process. Even in a time of extreme political polarizations, Missourians actually still trust one another. That is why ballot initiatives rank highest in the state in voters' confidence about how to make laws, because everybody gets an equal chance to vote and make change. Your vote, my vote, the governor's vote, a senator's vote, all count the same when it comes to a ballot initiative. Lobbyists and political contributions and the influence that they hold are actually diminished. They hold less influence when everybody gets an equal chance to vote on an issue. So in our time when, as Rabbi Goldstein mentioned, we should pray for our government and hope for our government to do better. But in a time when our politics are frankly broken, the ballot initiative process allows us to come together and solve important issues facing our communities. Some of those issues have been expanding Medicaid to cover an additional 250,000 uninsured residents who have been suffering in our state without access to health insurance, raising the minimum wage to provide a fairer day's pay for a hard day's work, ethics reforms, campaign finance contributions to try to make our government more responsive to our community. These are just some of the issues where voters have come together and said, this is what the majority wants, and that we have been able to win those critical changes. But those victories have upset some politicians and special interests. They have frankly had enough of our democracy. So after being on the losing side, the minority side of several recent votes, they have decided it is time for them to change our Constitution. They are proposing, I believe there are 20 bills in the legislature that would make qualifying and passing citizen initiative petitions much more difficult, if not impossible. They want to maintain power for politicians and special interests and those who yield influence in Jefferson City while taking ours. This is not entirely surprising. Politicians and special interests often seek to grab control. 30 years ago, actually, when the partisan makeup of the legislature was different than it is now, politicians were upset about some reforms that voters had taken upon ourselves to pass. So they tried to pass laws to make the process more difficult. Then Governor John Ashcroft vetoed the reforms, correctly pointing out that the ballot initiative process is an important tool for voters who have no influence in the halls of Jefferson City. He scolded politicians who sought to use their power to take power away from voters. Sadly, today, it is his son, Jay Ashcroft, who is leading the effort to restrict our Citizen Initiative petition. And as a parent, I will voice some disapproval of children not listening to their older and perhaps wiser parents. But just like in the early 90s, voters today are not asking for these changes or these attacks. In fact, from some polling we did this fall, huge majorities of voters oppose attempts by the legislature to make it harder for us to pass laws or amend our Constitution. While 20 bills have been filed in Jefferson City, not a single ballot initiative by a Missouri resident has been filed to change our process. If people wanted to change our process of democracy, we could actually use that process to change our process. But not one has been filed. The truth is, ballot initiatives are the people's power. We have used them infrequently to propose reforms, referring less than one issue to the ballot that every 4 the legislature makes us vote on. But it is a critical part of the toolkit of democracy because it maintains the balance between the people and the politicians elected to serve us. Now we are going to see the special interests try to send us innocuous sounding reforms to try to take our power. But we can stop them. And here is how. We need to remind people what initiative petitions are and why we value them. They're not the funny pieces of paper that you see. They're not about the number of signatures that we need to gather or where we need to gather them from. Ballot initiatives, the initiative petition process in Missouri, is about our public will. It is about our freedom, and it is about our heritage. It is a sacred constitutional right. We don't talk about the initiative petition process in the details because the details can be confusing. We talk about it in the values that we hold dear. The way for the majority, as the rabbi concluded her remarks, the way that the majority can come together and say, this needs to be the priority of our community, of our state. The other thing that we should do is we should expose the motivation behind those who are promoting so-called reforms. If voters aren't asking for this ourselves, and remember, we could use this process to change this process, why are politicians doing it to us? The point is, and some politicians will and have said this, that they don't want to follow our direction. We have heard state representative in Missouri say, I am proud to stand against the will of the people of my district. They don't respect our voice, and so they want to silence our voice. We cannot afford to be silent. There are some tools on here, and these will be emailed out in the next day or two, some of these links of ways that you can email your legislator, your state representative and your state senator, and say, I don't think destroying our century-old tradition of direct democracy should be the priority of our government. You can sign up to work with Jobs with Justice to come, and we are doing phone banking. It's an opportunity to call other voters, talk to them about these issues, educate voters about these issues, and encourage them to contact their elected officials. We will be traveling to Jefferson City the first week of May, Tuesday, May 3rd. We would love to have you join us. If you are a member of a community organization, labor union, faith-based group, there's an opportunity to ask your organization to join the growing coalition in fighting to protect our democracy. And I would always encourage everyone to consider becoming a member of an organization that is fighting for this. I work at Jobs with Justice, so of course I'll say Jobs with Justice is a great organization to join. But there are many, and many of you are perhaps already members of groups like JCRC and others that are part of this coalition. But the most important thing is we can't be silent, because if we are, we will lose this fight. We will lose 115 years of Missouri tradition and the ability for the majority in Missouri to have our voices heard. As I listen to the debates on this, it is very clear to me that there are some who just do not wish to hear or to follow the will of the majority. And I really appreciated Rabbi Goldstein's remarks at the beginning of this and reminding us just how important that can really be. So I would conclude by saying, this is our democracy that is at stake. Let's join together and let's defend it. If you have further questions for me, or frankly anyone else on the Jobs with Justice team, but you can see my email in here is just richard@mojwj.org. I would be happy to help arrange this presentation in other spaces and other groups. And I'm happy to try to answer any questions. And I very much appreciate the size of this group, the enthusiasm to fight to protect democracy, the intention there, and for your allowance to me to join you and be your guest this evening.
Richard, thank you so much for sharing your time and expertise with us this evening. It's always a pleasure to work with you and have you be a part of our community. We will be certain to send out all of the calls to action that you've just given us and to everyone who's registered for the program tonight. I'm Cheryl Adelstein, the Deputy Director of the Jewish Community Relations Council, a proud sponsor of one of the sponsors of tonight's program. At this time, we'd like to open up the floor for questions for Richard. If you have a question, you can type it in the chat and I'll ask Richard, or if you prefer, please use the Zoom feature at the bottom with the reactions feature to raise your hand and we'll call on you. So let's begin. And I will get us kicked off here. Can you tell us where we are in the legislative process? I know there's been 20+ bills. We don't have to get into the nitty-gritty details of them, but I know things are moving in both houses. So if you could give everybody an update on where we are in the House and where we are in the Senate and what you think is going to happen next.
Yes, there are 2 bills in the Senate They were both heard earlier today in their committee. So the next step for those is to they will likely come out of committee, but will be debated on the Senate floor. The rest of the bills are originating in the House. One has already passed the House. Another is likely to pass tomorrow. And then there will be a number that will follow. So the priority conversations with elected officials are frankly with the Senate. If you have a relationship with your state senator, the St. Louis region, that can include Jill Shoup, Brian Williams, Andrew Koenig, Bill Eigel, Angela Mosley, Doug Beck. I'll probably forget a number, but trying to think of who's all there. They would be Senator Carla May. Those would be the most important senators to reach out to. Senator Steve Roberts. Those would be the most important members to reach out to. But I would encourage, because there will be a number of bills that will continue to move that will come out of the House as well, to contact state representatives as well.
Thank you. We do have some questions in the chat. So from Diana Fine, she asked, what is being done to spread this message across the rural areas of Missouri?
Yeah, so one of our favorite partners in this is a group called the Missouri Rural Crisis Center. So a wonderful organization of independent family farmers that are helping spread awareness of this. We've been doing this presentation for about a month now, and there's over 40 groups that have, in response to this, signed on to be part of the coalition to fight against this. And a number of those groups have rural constituencies that they're helping spread the word on this. I do think it is an important note that I believe it's 67 or 69% of people do not want to see this process be harder. That spans all demographics. And the initiative petition process has frankly been used by progressives. It has been used by conservatives. It has been prioritized by maybe more metro area groups and by rural groups. So there are, this is not an issue that breaks down along particularly partisan or demographic issues. I really think everyone has a reason to want to protect their voice in Missouri.
Thank you. Another question in the chat. How common is the initiative petition in other states, and does it have similar parameters to what Missouri has?
So there are, I believe, 24 other states that have the initiative petition process. Not all of them do, but we have had it for a very long time. Missouri actually has one of the most difficult processes in terms of the number of signatures that we need to gather and where we need to gather them from. And so, when I'm on national calls or talking to other networks, they already look at our process and say, wow, that's really difficult. We don't want to be anything like Missouri. And I say, yeah, sometimes we don't either. So Missouri already has a very rigorous process. And then most states, there are a few states that require a higher threshold for an initiative to pass, but most states that have the initiative petition process require a simple majority, because that's how we do all of our elections. The majority that vote on an issue win. And I think that's a pretty standard tradition. I see the question from Sally.
Hold on one second. There's somebody who had their hand up. Ernie Demba, I saw your face and you had your hand up and now your hand isn't up anymore. Ernie, do you still have a question?
Well, my question was going to be how many other states were like us? And the question was asked and I put my hand down, but I'll make a comment. It was a very good presentation, really enjoyed it. And the question got asked beforehand, so I put my hand down. Thank you very much.
Well, I just didn't want to miss you, Ernie. It's nice to see
Thank
you.
you. Thank you.
Sally asks, if one of these measures passes, is there a possibility to organize a referendum to overturn it, as it was done with right to work?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Hi, Sally. And I forgot to mention this. So because our right to the initiative petition was embedded in our Constitution, the legislature cannot actually change it themselves. What they have to do is send their proposal to the people to vote on. So they cannot change this law themselves, but they can send it to us. Now, one unfortunate thing about when the legislature sends something compared to the initiative, if citizens do an initiative petition, we draft a law and we send it to the Secretary of State, and the Secretary of State gets to write the ballot summary about what your petition would do, because it would be ridiculous if you got to define what it is that your proposal does. That'd be a really easy way to cheat. Of course, the legislature gets to do that. They get to define the issue and write the ballot summary that shows up on the ballot for voters to see. So I would suspect the legislature wouldn't write a ballot summary that says, do you think we should make it harder to place issues on the ballot by increasing the number of signatures needed to qualify, or by giving Missouri the highest threshold margin for passage in the entire country? I don't think they would say that. I think they would say something quite different from that. And so that is the importance right now of doing presentations like this, to really understand any of these bills, any of these things that we see on the ballot are designed to do two things: make it harder to put an issue on the ballot and make it harder to pass. And that's what they want, because they're frankly sick and tired of hearing from us.
Richard, I see a little conversation going on in the chat about IPs being nonpartisan and what are some that conservatives have supported. I think would be interesting if you would remind folks about Clean Missouri in 2018, and then what happened in 2020.
Yeah, so they're right that there have been numerous issues that conservatives have used on the initiative petition process. The Hancock Amendment, which is a tax policy amendment that was passed in the late 80s. That's actually what spurred the action of the then Democrats that Governor Ashcroft vetoed. The efforts to remove the city's earnings tax were bankrolled by a conservative activist and donor here. And so there are certainly issues like that. There are then issues that I think are interesting because they build broad nonpartisan coalitions. The Clean Missouri Amendment in 2018, that was an ethics and redistricting proposition, was an effort that had bipartisan support. And so you see things like that. And then there's issues that you might more traditionally consider progressive, the minimum wage, or even Medicaid expansion, for example. Although all of these issues pick up support from both progressives and conservatives in the state. And that's because issues allow people to express themselves in ways that sometimes partisan politics and candidate-based politics make it more difficult. Sometimes the legislature complains that we amend things and we didn't know what we were doing, and they want to change it. Well, the legislature already has the ability. Frankly, what they did with Clean Missouri is they sent something back to the ballot. I think they did some of their wording tricks with that back to the ballot. but it then repealed the issue that citizens had passed. The legislature can still do that. Citizens should be able to put things on the ballot. If the legislature wants to put something on the ballot, they can do that. But what they're trying to do now is prevent us from ever being able to put an issue on the ballot. One of the most egregious things of two of these bills, the two bills in the Senate, which were Senate Joint Resolution 31 and Senate Joint Resolution 37 that were heard today, is they actually create double standards between citizen initiated referrals and politician initiated referrals. They would both require citizen initiatives to receive either 60% or 66% of the vote to pass, but would say that ideas that come from Jefferson City would only need to receive the 50% margin. Well, that's just a complete double standard, and I think a real insult to the people of this state.
Are there any further questions for Richard? Some of us who spend a lot of time thinking about this like want to dig into the nitty-gritty details, but I know we don't want to talk those things because it just gets confusing. Let's see. Chris has asked a question, and then maybe we'll take one more. What words are proponents of the killing of the Citizen Initiative using to justify their propositions to the voters? So what are those who are proponents of these changes saying?
I mean, some of the people that want to change this are wanting to say, well, we need to protect our Constitution. It is that is certainly a talking point of some activists that the Constitution is a sacred document and it shouldn't be amended by the people of the state. I personally have a hard time with that. I mean, our Constitution, women have the right to vote in Missouri because of a citizen initiative petition. I think that's a good thing and needed to be amended. So I have a hard time with that, but that is often the lifting up of the Constitution is some sort of document that could never be improved upon. Is a standard talking point.
I see a question that I've answered in the chat, but potentially you have a different answer or thought about this. Someone's asked, how effective is written testimony versus in-person testimony?
So usually in-person testimony is the most effective. I will say when this debate happened on the House last week, State Representative Trish Gunby read testimony that had been submitted online by people who had gathered signatures on initiative petitions. They talked about gathering signatures in the rain and the snow, because they were passionate about their neighbors having access to healthcare or cleaning up our state government. I found those words very powerful and appreciated Representative Gunby reading those on the House floor. But those are always really important conversations that you can have with your elected officials if you happen to know them outside when they're not in session, can really have a profound impact. It is often not statistics about what percentage or what state does what. It is the stories of people who say, this is how I've participated in this process. This is how it has impacted me. This is how it has impacted my community, that are the most powerful. And so I always really encourage people to, focus on their experience of the process when talking about it.
And Steve Skranka asks, if any of these pass by a majority, will it take 2/3 to repeal it?
That is correct, Steve. This is an interesting point that I heard someone make earlier today, is part of this vote would actually rob future generations of the ability to make the same decision, because future generations couldn't undo what we were doing, what we might do this fall. And so that is absolutely true, Steve. And there was an amendment asking that the bill have the 2/3 or the higher threshold applied to it in order for it to become effective. So if you're going to say we should need 2/3 to amend our Constitution, shouldn't we also need 2/3 to make that decision? And that amendment was defeated, as people said, well, we should use the current rules to do that. But I do think the point that this would rob future generations of the opportunity to participate in our democracy in the way that we and our parents and potentially our grandparents have had, I think is a very valid point.
Any final questions for Richard before we move on? Great. Well, Richard, thank you again. We will make sure, someone has asked us to summarize all the calls to action. We will send those out. You'll get it tomorrow or the next day with all the links. I highly recommend signing up for Richard's emails, because that's how I learn every week what's going on. Another quick way to continuously get advocacy information is to sign up for the JCRC's advocacy updates. We send them out weekly with links to talk to legislators and email committee and submit written testimony. So we try to keep you up to date as well. But again, thank you, Richard, very much. Thank you, Rabbi Goldstein. And I'm going to return the program to Holly Bernstein, who's really done such a fantastic job of organizing our program tonight. There was 9 or 10 sponsors of this program. It's a lot of people to organize, and Holly just deserves our thanks and gratitude for her efforts.
Thank you, Cheryl. You actually have summarized most of what I wanted to say, which is great, which is to thank our 11 community organizations that co-sponsored tonight's program, and to thank Andrea and Richard for doing such a great job speaking and teaching us, and to thank all of you who attended the program. And as Cheryl said, we're going to be following up with an email in the next couple of days, and that will have a link to the recording and a link hopefully to slides and links to the various ways you can stay involved, because as this works its way through the legislature, and if it ends up on our ballot, there'll be a lot of work to be done to try to defeat it. So we definitely encourage you to sign up to get further information. And again, thank you all for coming, and have a great evening.